Hey guys, Savage Joy here with Real Progressives. Tonight I am joined by Mindy Messmer. She is actually running in New Hampshire, District 1, and she currently was elected in 2016 for the New Hampshire House of Reps. So thank you so much for joining us, Mindy.
Thank you so much for having me, Joy.
Absolutely. The first thing that catches my attention with you is the fact that you're a scientist. And a lot of my viewers always joke, why do you get so many lawyers and there seems like no scientists running? So that excites people. So of course my first question is global warming a hoax by the Chinese?
No,
get that out of the way.
A lot of science and a lot of evidence, the two words we're not supposed to use to show that global warming and actually sea level rise is real. So I'm a scientist, I believe in science and evidence, and I believe it's real.
Sweet, good answer. I was like, please don't throw me off guard because I'm joking. So you, as I said, you were elected to the New Hampshire House of Reps in 2016. I was looking over the ballots and everything. It looks like you were so close. You were like within 60 or so votes, which is so exciting. So why? What are your goals with running for this position? Like, what do you hope to happen by running for this?
Right. Well, I think it's really important right now to have people who believe in science be elected to Washington because of all the changes that we all hear about. We just heard today that Trump wants to cut 23% of the budget to the EPA and 72% of the budget to the clean energy research programs. And he wants to basically rout out a lot of clean energy spending and development programs in general. So I think it's really important. We heard about how the EPA is cleansing the climate change or sea level rise websites. We hear how 9 people walked out of the National Park Advisory Commission recently. We hear about 700 EPA workers leaving. And when that kind of loss of talent happens, they fill in with people that they want to be there who will represent industry and lobby for industry. And that's concerning to me because when Trump talks about for every one rule or regulation that's created to get pulled down, that kind of indiscriminate pulling down of regulations and policies that are meant to protect public health are going to be a real problem when it comes to, a lot of the work that I do in the legislature here in New Hampshire is to prevent chronic disease and cancer through lowering drinking water advisories and standards. So when you start pulling down rules and regulations haphazardly like that, you really create what I'm concerned about as being a lot of threats to public health across the country. And we know that there are about 625 bases across the United States where drinking water is contaminated by these PFC contamination, perfluorinated chemicals and other chemicals that really, we know, cause cancer and other chronic disease. So when you start really attacking science like that, and we only have one scientist up there in Congress to fight back, that's a big problem. And that's why I decided to run. One of the big reasons I decided to run.
Absolutely. That's something we don't hear a lot about. We hear people talking about the environment, of course, but not a lot of people address the fact that it affects your health. So that's something that's so important that you are bringing up that correlation. Right. When I was looking at your website, it states that you are known for blowing the whistle on the CDC. So can you give an example of that?
Yeah, so I was a scientist owning my own business. I own my own business. I have 2 boys. And in 2014, some of the kids that my younger son went to school with were talking at school, he said, about some children that were sick with these rare cancers. And the kids were worried about it. I got calls from some of the parents that I knew. And one of my friends said, "You're a scientist. Isn't there maybe an environmental trigger for these? Do you think this is a problem?" And at the time, I was taking some epidemiology classes and things. I'm about finishing right now a master's degree in clinical science at Georgetown. And so I knew that this was a cancer cluster, that these children who were getting these specifically devastating, really rare cancers, that some were dying and some are dying still, are holding on. I knew that the rate of these cancers for the population in my community was too high. And because they were all the same type of cancer, I knew there was a problem. So I reported that to the state of New Hampshire Department of Environmental Health and Human Services in 2014. It took them 2 years to come back and tell us that it was a cancer cluster. And when they called myself and another mother to the library to tell us that, they told us, we're just going to sit back and watch and see what happens. And I was really upset because I knew as a scientist I'm used to investigating things. You could take a sample of the water that they drink. You could take a sample of their blood to see if there's chemicals in it. You could see if there's something in the soil. Maybe the kids played out in the soil and got sick from something. And they said, no, we're going to just watch. So I went home and thought about it and then decided to anonymously report it to a local newspaper and told the newspaper reporter where to find the report. He did that, and it went up in the news and it blew up. And parents were understandably really upset about it. The governor at the time, Governor Maggie Hassan, who's now our senator, formed a task force to look into the causes of these devastating cancers. We thought maybe there was an environmental trigger. So that's how that came to be. We got to work on some really big environmental issues, including one that's a very important issue. That's an old Superfund site, which is basically a dump, which is unlined on the bottom and is contaminating water of 5 towns around it and has been since the late 1960s. So, when you start to really look at some of these issues, there may be some of these in most communities, because at the time when the late 1970s, early 1970s, we didn't know what to do with this stuff. We just dumped it in holes. And now we're starting to see the effects. Back in the mid 80s, there were reports of high rates of cancers in areas around this landfill at the time, and they capped it, and everybody sort of forgot about it. But so it's important to be really vigilant, to understand what's in your community, to understand the hazards, to understand what's in your water, and to protect our water, because it's an invaluable resource, but it's not limitless. So we really have to make sure we protect our drinking water.
Absolutely. So as a parent, what does something like Flint do to your mind? Like, how, I can't even fathom, because me without kids and me without being a scientist, it's just, it just blows my mind. What thoughts do you have about that?
That is such a horribly tragic situation. And we still are not very far along. There are still many homes and families in Flint, Michigan that don't have access to clean drinking water. And that is just tragic. And I think unfortunately, it is an area where people were socially and economically disadvantaged. And it was it was very difficult for them to get recognition of the problem. And I think it's criminal what happened, the way that the authorities, took the water from and didn't treat it correctly, and it caused the corrosion of the pipes that caused this problem. And just the lack of response, all the way up to the governor and the regulatory agencies that are meant to protect the people. So I think it's a horribly tragic situation. I think it's still going on, and we need to really pay attention and try to be helpful to those people, so that we can get them some clean drinking water.
Absolutely. Something I found really fascinating with, you were just elected in 2016 to the New Hampshire House of Reps. However, during that first year, you got 3 bills you sponsored passed, which is not common. So that's really impressive. Can you talk about those 3 bills and what they were for?
Sure. I actually put 4 bills in and immediately was told by leadership to take them down, because they thought that as a freshman rep, I didn't know what I was doing. I shouldn't be involved. I should just sit back and watch. And I said, I don't think so. So, coming out of the governor's task force, I knew there were several issues that needed to be dealt with, and that I was I was able to do that. So the 3 bills that passed were bills that created commissions to study some of the issues that are problems. The first one was to create a statutory commission of the governor's task force, which is important because the governor's task force is reliant upon what governor's in office, and that was a concern to me. So now we have that task force as a commission. It doesn't rely on who the governor is. And the next one is a commission to look at protection of groundwater and drinking water and emergency fire sources for fighting fires in the seacoast area. And this is a big problem because now, I've come to find out that not only is this Superfund site an issue, but there's an Air Force base. There are several other issues that threaten the drinking water of the seacoast. And the seacoast of New Hampshire is a haven for tourists. We have lots of people that want to live here. But if we don't have clean drinking water, especially in years of the drought when it got really tight on drinking water, we have some wells that are shut down now that supply some of the biggest cities, city of Portsmouth and the town of Hampton. And when you have that kind of contamination in the system that, you can't supply enough water to the people that are here, to the population, that's a big problem. So that commission is looking at ways to, everybody comes to the table, the whole seacoast water, all the water suppliers and the towns are represented on the commission, and it's a way for us to sit down and talk about how to protect our drinking water. The last one is a really important commission too. It is a commission to make the Department of Health and Human Services and the Environmental Services overlay their data so that we know what toxins could be creating what sort of health effects across the state. And that will be used to identify things like cancer clusters before they get out of control, I hope, and to understand what kinds of, to provide more evidence for what kinds of health outcomes may happen from exposures to various things. We have a problem with arsenic in the state of New Hampshire in our drinking water, mostly because of the type of bedrock geology that we have that's used for providing the water. And high levels of arsenic, we know, cause bladder cancer. And so one of the pieces of legislation I'm working on right now is to try to get the state of New Hampshire Department of Environmental Services to cut in half the level of exposure to arsenic in our drinking water. So the fourth bill that I put in last year was a bill to lower the standards in drinking water for perfluorinated chemicals. And while that did not pass, and perfluorinated chemicals are the Teflon-like components. They make Gore-Tex fabric out of them. They're highly resistant to heat and to water. And so when they get in the environment, they're really persistent. They don't go away. And when you drink them in your water, they also stay in your body for a lot longer than is healthy. So some of the chemicals, some of those PFC chemicals can stay in your body for 7 years before they're half the concentration that they were when you ingested them. So it's a really long half-life in your body. And that bill didn't pass. It actually got retained in finance. I tried another way to lower the limit with an amendment to a different bill. That failed. But what both of those did in the first year was an opportunity for me to really educate the entire House and Senate on the importance of drinking water, on the importance of making sure that we protect our tap water. And this year, that last bill that didn't pass the first year was just released from finance, and it is on to the Senate now. So there's a possibility that that one will clear the Senate. And that one has another added benefit in that it addresses a very big issue where we have industry in the central portion of New Hampshire that has emitted these PFCs to the air for a period of about 50 years and has contaminated, I think, 2 miles worth of groundwater in the central portion of our state. So that bill has now been amended to address air contamination of groundwater from emissions from those stacks, as well as drinking water levels of PFCs. So that bill was a little slow, but it looks like it's probably going to go through in some form or fashion this session. So all 4 may pass. And I've got a lot of other bills this session, the arsenic one, in addition to about 40 other bills I'm working on right now that have to do with various things associated with environmental impacts as well. So.
Wow, that is amazing. Joe, one of our viewers, he kind of read my mind. When I was researching you, I thought it was a typo or something that it said arsenic, and you just said it again. So Joe wants to know, why is there arsenic in drinking water? And that's what I was wondering as well.
Yeah, so arsenic can be, and in New Hampshire, it can either be in pesticides or it can be in just the regular bedrock geology, the rock that you drill wells into and then extract the water to drink from. And in some cases, it's we know that it's from just the natural bedrock geology. And in some cases, we think that there are other sources like pesticides or other chemicals that have arsenic in them. But we've known for a really long time that arsenic is a poison. So we want to make sure that we have as little exposure to it. Really, no level of arsenic in your water is safe. And we know that the current level in New Hampshire is 10 parts per billion of arsenic in your water. Other states like New Jersey have had a much lower number, 5 parts per billion, for about 17 years. So New Hampshire is really behind the times, and that's one of the reasons I'm trying so hard to get the number down to 5. But we know that if we did that, we would save probably at least $6.5 million in lifetime cancer health-related costs for treating people with cancer if we lowered it to half of that. So it's a significant thing, and a lot of times legislators and regulators don't really look at the full cost. They talk about, well, how much is it going to be for those municipalities to treat the water? But what they forget to look at is how much money will be saved, just straight money in healthcare costs, for saving X number of cases of cancer. So that's one of the kinds of things that I'm trying to do, is to really say, well, it may cost $2 million for municipalities to implement these changes, but we're going to save $6.5 million in healthcare costs. And that doesn't even account for lost time at work, or having to take care of a family member, or something, various other costs that are associated with having someone who's got a grave illness in your family. So I hope that explains it.
Yeah, absolutely. You are a founding member of New Hampshire's Safe Water Alliance. Can you kind of give a description of what that organization is? Yeah, so in January of 2017, we decided to form New Hampshire Safe Water Alliance. And the main goal of that organization was to educate other people on environmental issues, mostly water, but it's a lot of other issues too, and use that as a mechanism for activism, for legislative activities that we were involved with. So that, I'll say something like, within that Facebook book, I'll say, call to action this week, please email your legislators on the Resources Committee, tell them to support House Bill 1766, and I'll tell them what to do. Or I'll say, now's the time to call your representatives, or now's the time to call all the representatives in the House and send emails to the House, or send letters to the editors so people get educated on these issues before they actually reach the committees or are heard in the committees. So it's a way for us to activate people and to educate people about protecting our environment. We started a group of us, Testing for Peas. We're a group of women that were very actively involved in a very big environmental issue at Pease Air Force Base, where 2,000 children were exposed to perfluorinated chemicals unknowingly in their drinking water, and now have very high levels of these chemicals in their bodies, including 350 children. And we don't know what's going to happen in the future with these children who have these high levels of chemicals in their bodies. So those women, those very courageous women from Testing for Peas, those 3 women joined with us, and another couple of people from Greenland Safe Water Action, which is another group we formed to deal with the Coakley landfill Superfund site issue. So we combined forces together, and now we have around 650 members, not only from New Hampshire, but from across the country. And we work together to solve each other's problems. It's a really interesting, really cool group of people. And we really educate each other and activate each other on very important issues. That's incredible. I saw that very recently, within the past 10 days, you were endorsed by a brand new Congress. and also Bruce Cohen, who is the former New Hampshire Senate Majority Leader.
Yeah.
So that's pretty exciting. Is he someone you've worked with before? He retired, or?
He actually, I've known Bert for quite a long time. Our children went to the same school, and so I've known him as a member of our community for a long time. And he's very familiar with the type of work I do on the state level. I also am a member of the Bernie Steering Committee here in New Hampshire. My son worked for Bernie. He was a paid intern as a high school student. And we, as a family, were very committed to supporting Bernie, and we did, phone calls and canvassing. And so that's how I got a little bit more involved with political stuff around Bert. But yes, he knows about the kind of work I'm doing because he's in our community. He understands the kind of activism I've been doing. So that's why he was supportive of my run for Congress.
Well, and I also saw that you are the daughter of a union worker. So you kind of grew up knowing what picket lines were and things like that.
Yeah.
So I'm sure that shaped you.
It did, absolutely. Yep.
Can you tell us a little bit about what that was like, having basically an activist for a mother?
Yes, I'm so proud of that. Thank you for asking that. Yeah, my mother was an emergency room nurse, and then she started to work for SEIU 1199, which is a nurses union in New York State. And she retired about 5 years ago, I think, as vice president in New York City of SEIU 1199. So, I grew up hearing stories about her fights for workers' rights in hospitals, picket lines, and, all the negotiations she would attend and really foster. She was part of the biggest settlement against Mercy Hospital in the state of New York, the biggest settlement ever for nurses. So I'm really proud of that. And I really, as a kid, when you're growing up and you sort of live this life, you don't really know what you're learning. I kind of went off to school and became a scientist. And then when this issue happened in my community, there were some other things that I did with respect to my family that were sort of activism too. But when I started getting involved in this, I really didn't understand that I already knew a lot about how to do this. I certainly had help from people that other representatives, Representative Rennie Cushing, helped to form New Hampshire Safe Water Alliance, but it sort of comes natural to you. You know how to collaborate. And I think as women, actually, in general, we know how to collaborate with other women. We know how to develop teamwork. We know how to work with each other and work off each other to get things done. So it was an interesting revelation for me to realize what that connection was to my upbringing. And my mother was always really supportive of me as a scientist when I was young. We would go on family trips, and I would, we'd be hiking somewhere, and I'd pick up rocks, and I'd bring a bunch of rocks home. And I had the best rock collection in 5th grade. I really liked rocks. And when I went to school, I wanted to be a computer scientist, I thought, for the first year or so, half year at freshman year in college. And when I decided that wasn't right for me, my mother said, why don't you take geology? And so she was really supportive of me as a scientist, and that ended up being what I'm now, my profession up until a few years ago when I decided to go back to school again. So, yeah.
That is so amazing. I can't even fathom growing up in that kind of environment. You learned very early on. I learned when I was like 37, as many of us did. Thank you, Bernie.
Yeah, absolutely.
Speaking of women, okay, you know where I'm going. There are so many versions of what happened at the Women's March. So you were asked to speak at the Women's March. Then your invitation was rescinded. And then you were offered the position to speak again.
Yes.
But by then you had already agreed to speak somewhere else as well, so you did too.
Right.
So can you just kind of clarify, why all that happened?
Right. So, being an activist in my community, I'm in the press a lot for all the stuff that I do, and So they asked me, the organizers on the Seacoast asked me to participate in the Women's March. And I was so happy because that was a way for me to speak about issues that I think since the Trump election have happened, and before that, that are very disconcerting to me as a woman. And I'm sure you share the same feelings I do, and many people do. So I viewed that as a way for me to really talk about how passionate I was about my science, how passionate I am about activism, and how passionate I am about getting women elected to office. It's a huge, huge issue for me. I think that is really important. So I was happy we came to an agreement that I was not going to talk about my congressional campaign at all. And I was happy to do that because these issues are so important to me as a state legislator and as a woman. So I was very happy to agree to that, and that's our agreement. Well, a couple of days before the event happened, I got a phone call and they said, sorry, we can't allow you to speak because another candidate complained about your speaking. And I said, well, there's one other woman candidate in the race, and I assumed it was her. And I said, well, let her speak then. It's fine. She's a woman. Let her speak. She can talk about activism or whatever she wants to talk about as long as we all abide by the same rules. Well, they said, no, it was a man that complained about it. And so it got out somehow to the press, and the press called me, and then they did a story on it, and they didn't know who it was. I actually didn't know who it was either. And so one by one, the male candidates said it wasn't me until one was left. And then people were so upset about it, it took off on Twitter that the organizers of the Concord, New Hampshire March called me at 11 o'clock the night before and said, we feel so badly, we really want you to come and speak. And Concord is where our state capital is. So it's where I legislate. People know me there. So I was happy to do that, and I agreed to it. And then the next morning of the day of the march, I was getting into my car literally to go to Concord, and I got a call and said, we decided to change our mind and we want you to come speak in Portsmouth in the Seacoast. So that was interesting. And so I ended up doing both in Concord, and then I ran back over to the Seacoast, which is about an hour or so away, back to the Seacoast to speak also. And it was a fantastic day. It was so empowering to speak to so many women and just talk about what I think is really important about really pulling each other up, tapping each other on the shoulder, and running for office. Because it's important to have women in office, I think, to make some really important decisions that will affect our country as a whole.
Absolutely. And I digress a little, but you're actually the third woman in a row, and I'm doing 5 in a row. So next week I have 2 more, Monday and Wednesday. So I'm like 5 female candidates in a row. I find that so exciting. Yeah, I mean, to me, it's just incredible that event is for empowering women, and they kind of bow down to a male who had a hissy fit. I mean, it blows my mind. That's why I wanted to, I couldn't even believe that was happening. But I'm so happy all of it turned out well, and you got to speak at both.
Absolutely.
And you're classy for still going back, because I'm going to leave it at that. I might not have. They might have restated again.
Yeah. I mean, it was, it's funny. I laughed about it afterwards because although it was really agonizing when it was going on, the end result was better than I could have ever expected. So it was good.
You talk a lot on your platform about inequality. What specifically do you focus on, be it LGBTQ, people of color, or just kind of everything?
Well, as many people probably are now, I'm upset about what's being said in terms of, the immigration policies that are, being implemented here in the since the election. And I think it's a lot of the stuff, a lot of the things that are being said. One of the biggest reasons I decided to run was because I'm worried about what our children are hearing, our young people. And I'm worried about what that will do to our young women as they go into the workforce. I worry about women of, people of color and trans people that, immediately Trump decided to say that he wouldn't allow them to be in the military, various things that we sort of took some big steps back. I had a hard enough time back in the 80s going into a STEM field with all men in the business that I was in. However, there still was some, a level of discourse you just didn't descend to. And I felt like every time running up to the election, we kept hearing these horrible things come out of our president's mouth. And, I thought every time they would stick and none of them did. I'm concerned about that. I'm concerned about what our young people are hearing. And so I submitted a resolution this year, an anti-hate resolution, and it calls for, the state of New Hampshire to resolve that not to discriminate against anybody based on gender or ethnicity or race, and it cites all the information, a bunch of things that have happened on a national level, but also some very disconcerting things that happened in New Hampshire. One of which was the near lynching of a biracial 8-year-old boy in one of the towns in western New Hampshire, which probably you may have heard of, but and that was the thing that really struck me. That a young boy, and then there was another incident in the Seacoast area. So that compelled me to write this resolution over the summer, and I submitted it the first day we got back to session, which was September 6th. And so that, got wide bipartisan support, so much support that I had to turn people away. We only have a certain number of sponsors for bills. And that made me feel heartened. I think that, I believe that we will make a decision in November to vote people that talk like this. I mean, I was in my kitchen when Roy Moore was going on about how he only dated 13-year-olds if he had the express, permission of the parents, while I'm making my lunch, my 15-year-old's lunch in the morning for him to go off to school with. And, I've spent my whole life, I think, with my kids telling them about how to treat women and how to treat people of color and how to treat people fairly. And to have elected officials talk like that in the media and have my children exposed to that just really set me off. And so that was one of the big reasons that I decided to run. One of my good friends who's 75 years old or so, I asked him one day, and I said, he's a great Democrat, and I said, so have you always been a Democrat? And he told me this story about how on election day when he was 8 years old, he went to the polls with his parents, and his father was a Republican, and his mother was a closet Democrat. And the father kept turning around and telling her, now make sure you vote for Goldwater when you get inside. And so he went into the voting booth with his mother, and she went Democrat all the way down the ticket. And she said, shh, don't tell your dad. And so, that kind of thing stuck in his head, and he's been a lifelong Democrat since. So I really think that shows, in addition to other things, that it's really important that we set good examples for our children, and we don't allow this to degrade into 3 steps back or more steps back than we have gained, over time. So that's one of the reasons I decided to run. And that resolution that I wrote passed the Criminal Justice Committee 13-7, which is a tough committee to get it through. I was happy for that. And then it passed the House floor to the Senate a couple of weeks ago. There was a nasty attempt to kill it on the floor, which was ceremoniously slapped down hard. And then the bill passed and went on to the Senate. So I think, I think that we will make decisions in the voting booth based on, what's been happening, and we'll make a clear statement that we're not about this kind of stuff. So.
We have to, we have to. That's one of the beautiful things about, being able to do the show. I just, you look at these comments and you see how, excited people get about having these people with these progressive platforms, and it gives you hope.
Absolutely.
We have to turn it around.
Absolutely.
Of course, one of the litmus tests for many people is healthcare. I mean, that's one of the many things talked about. So I do see that you state that healthcare you want healthcare for all. are you single payer, Medicare for all? What is your stance on obtaining health care for all of us?
Right. So I think, for the richest nation in the world, basically, to not be able to provide health care to everyone in the country is just really unacceptable. I think that we have to provide high quality, affordable health care to every citizen of this country, regardless of what race, what socioeconomic level they're at. It's a right of everyone to be treated when they're sick. And so I believe in Medicare for all. I think it's a system that works. I think it can be extended to everyone. I think it would lower the price of prescription drugs if the government had the ability to negotiate with bigger blocks of people. I think it would spur innovation because people wouldn't be tied to jobs that they don't like because of their health care. I was a small business owner for 20 years. I know what it's like to try to attract talent from other big companies that can provide really good health care to their workers. And as a small business owner, that's hard to do for an affordable price. So I know what that's like. And I think that, I was lucky. I had a husband that had a really good paying job. We had good health care, so I could start my own company. But not everyone has that ability. And I think that giving everybody Medicare for all would allow people to innovate, something we sorely need in this country, to generate some innovation in small businesses and provide people with hope. I mean, right now, people are working 3 jobs to make ends meet, yet if they have a serious illness in their family, they're $400 away from bankruptcy in the state of New Hampshire. Now, that's not right. I think everyone should be able to not work 3 and 4 jobs to make ends meet and put food on the table, and be able to spend time with their families rather than spending all their time working. And I think that's probably why the state of New Hampshire has such a high rate of opioid overdoses. We have the 2nd highest rate in the country here in New Hampshire. You probably remember our wonderful president calling it the drug-infested den of New Hampshire. And right now, I just saw a few days ago the most up-to-date records from the state of New Hampshire, and we are on target to be even higher than we were last year, even though we think that some things have been implemented to help it, but we're still on a very high upward rate of opioid overdoses in New Hampshire. So, and I think it's not just low-income people that are subject to this. It's lots of people. It's doctors' family. And I think it's an indication of where people are feeling hopeless in our society. So,
I've worked in healthcare for almost a decade, and I could tell you stories. I mean, it breaks your heart every day just going to work and just seeing how desperate people are. Do I, take a pill every other day? Do I cut it in half? Do I, but then I'm going to wind up in the hospital and have that bill. I mean, people shouldn't even have to deal with that. It's heartbreaking. On that, are you familiar with what MMT is?
No.
It's modern monetary theory. It's something we talk about frequently on Real Progressives. Essentially that federal tax dollars don't fund spending. So when, the people like Trump and stuff push the deficits going up, that's why we can't afford it.
Oh,
that's not accurate.
Right.
So basically, we can do for our people what we need to do. Right. It's by design that we're being told that, there's no money for it. When in a caring, civilized society, we would make it available by any means necessary, and we do have those means.
Absolutely.
So, yeah, that's what's so frustrating because we all know we can do this.
And I think that, putting us $1 trillion plus in more into debt is a mechanism so that they can say that we can't afford Social Security or Medicare for all. I think that I mean, the people that pass these budgets are supposed to be fiscal conservatives, and they're putting us, over $1 trillion more in our nation over $1 trillion more in debt. And there must be a reason for that. And I'm fairly confident that that's what they're going to end up saying is we have to cut Social Security. We know that Bernie talks about all the time and has been talking for years about how we just need to remove the upper income cap on Social Security, and that's a solid system. So there's a lot of games being played to make it just sort of evil stuff, to make it so that we can't be a generous nation that I think we are. I think we're generous people. I think everybody really, I just got back from a progressive conference, and they had done a very big survey on many of these issues. And it was interesting to see how Democrats, Republicans, and independents, basically the majority of all those polls agreed with the same kinds of things like Medicare for all, single payer, that we agree on. And I found that to be really interesting. Even majorities of Republicans agreed that we needed to do that. So I think that gives us all license to be as bold as we think we need to be and to really push for the things that everybody wants. Because I think that's why we're in the situation we're in. Disenfranchised people voted for Trump. And I think it's because the Democratic Party wasn't listening to those voters.
100%. And I think a lot of Republicans are now realizing that, they voted because they thought they would have better jobs and they would have, that job solidified, and they're finding out those things didn't happen. And now they're realizing I am going to lose my Obamacare, which they didn't know was called Obamacare. That's why they wanted to get rid of it, and things like this. And they're learning, okay, maybe I can still be registered a Republican, but maybe open up to these newer ideas. And we're definitely seeing a lot of that, which is important. Yeah. How do you feel about tuition-free college? I didn't see that on your platform.
Well, I'm a big supporter of public education. Absolutely. My son has one of my sons has a significant health issue, and I fought really, really hard to make sure that he could attend public school. They didn't want him to attend. They didn't want to deal with it. And one of the people that works in my campaign has known me throughout that time period, and they said they never saw somebody fight so hard for their child. So I'm a big believer in access to public education. I think that we should be able to make public colleges free. I think everybody should have access to education. The state of California did it up until not too long ago. And my cousins went to Cooper Union in New York City, which was basically a free education up until a few years ago. So I think it can be done. I think we just need to put a commitment to doing it. We need to put the money into it. And I think we need to make sure that we have an avenue for everyone to be able to lift themselves up and their families up.
Right. And we're noticing even some states are passing it with if your income is less than 120,000 a year or what have you, which is most people. So that definitely works as well. If that's a compromise, so be it. I also saw on your platform you do believe in 5 for 15. Yeah. What is New Hampshire's minimum wage as of now?
I believe it's 9 something. But I say that, but I actually think that it should be higher in many cases. So I say $15 or more, actually, because there are some areas like, New York City, you can't live on $15 an hour. Even in the Seacoast, New Hampshire area, you can't live on $15 per hour very easily. So, I support a livable working wage, depending on where you live. I think everybody should be able to work one job and spend time with their family. I think, this is causing a big breakdown in our family structures. And I think it's probably behind the cause of some of the addiction issues that we see.
I don't doubt that. That's a really good point. What else are you passionate about that may not have been on your website? Like, okay, let's say this. Say you get into Congress tomorrow. What is the first thing you're going to work on?
Well, I think obviously one of the biggest issues that we're now looking at is the gun violence issue. You know, right now I'm trying to actually work on, I'm getting calls from, you know, college and high school students in New Hampshire that are concerned about whether they should go to school and whether they're safe at school. I think that's a huge issue. I'm so proud of our young people that are stepping up and talking about this issue right now on our campuses and in the press. And I feel horrible that they're being attacked for doing this. But I think, you know, the energy that we're seeing in this, in the students standing up for what is right, for talking about this, is something that we should promote, and we should definitely pull these kids in and make sure that they are activated and make sure they vote, because that's the really important thing. We here in the state of New Hampshire, we've seen a lot of attacks on voting in the youth age group, and it's, you know, we want to make sure that we have everyone able to vote, and we want to make sure their voices are heard. So I think I just did a post a few hours ago. I'm not going to take any NRA money for my campaign, and in fact, I'm not taking any special interest or DC lobby PAC money that will seek to change my opinions on any of these issues. And I think that New Hampshire, and you know, many, you know, we're seeing here that a lot of car rental companies are not, you know, taking money from the NRA, and you know, I will not take any money from the NRA, and I think that corporations should reject, you know, gun manufacturing money and various lobby money like that. And I think we need to take a stand against this. No one, you know, I grew up in upstate New York. At the time, it was a very rural community. I grew up in a gun culture. No one needs an AR-15 for target shooting. And no one needs multiple magazines. That's ridiculous. Those are not meant to be target shooting, for target shooting. And we really need to be common, you know, invoke some common sense here about gun violence prevention. So that is a big issue. It's a big issue nationwide right now, and I think we really need to address it. I think it's like 1996, they enacted a law that said the CDC can't even study this. It's a public health issue. We need to figure out what is going on. We need science and evidence to look at how to prevent gun violence. So those are the things I'm really passionate about, that I would get to work at. If I could do it right now in the state of New Hampshire, I would do it. The problem is with our legislative schedule, we can't submit any more legislation this session. So I am working together with some of the people that have been calling me, trying to get a student violence prevention council started, things like that I can do. I'm reaching out to universities to try and get professors to start that as well.
Okay, right on. Do you, I'm sorry, I was looking at the comments and then I lost my train of thought. Deborah stated that if the minimum wage goes up, the overdoses will likely go down. And that's a really good point. Money in politics was also something I was going to ask you. That seems to be like the #1 problem. I had Congressman Ro Khanna on, and he started a bill to not take any PAC money or anything, and only 6 people in Congress signed it. And then we're seeing people like Marco Rubio, you know, will you stop taking NRA money? No, he wouldn't give an answer. So what made you decide to only take personal donations?
Well, I'm a legislator in New Hampshire, and I see how a lot of my legislation is fought so heavily by lobby. For instance, my PFC legislation, all of my PFC legislation to get perfluorinated chemicals out of our environment is heavily fought by Municipal Association. I was personally attacked by the Business and Industry Association in a concerted effort to call me emotional when I'm talking about the science behind why we should lower the drinking water standards. I had a bill a couple of weeks ago, about more like a month ago, where we were looking to limit the use of pesticides on daycares, on playgrounds and daycares. they sent lobbyists in to fight that from, it's called Rising. I think it's somewhat connected to Monsanto. And they fought our bills. That bill ended up dying on the floor. And I walked out of the chambers where we voted on the House floor, and there were these green pieces of paper lying around in the antechamber. And I picked one up, and it said, you know, if you don't spray pesticides on playfields, dandelions and blades of grass will get out of control and they'll trip the children. I mean, just insane stuff that is done. You have no idea what these lobbies are doing. Another bill that I had in was to remove the crumb rubber that they use on playgrounds, also on, you know, like playfields, because we're seeing that it's an ingenious plan actually done by the tire industry. You know, they can't put tires in landfills. So what do? They chop them up and they put them on playfields to get rid of them. And they charge about $1 million to $1.5 million per playfield for these things to be disposed of. And then now we're seeing where as they degrade, the dust comes up and children are inhaling it. And we're seeing that, I think there's about 220 people on a list being developed by a soccer coach, where there are 220 women or soccer goalies that have this special kind of lung cancer now. And we think it's from the fact that they bend over these soccer fields. And so when I put this bill in the state of New Hampshire, 7 lobbyists were flown in from across the country, literally flown in just to fight this bill. And they said the most absurd things, like the lead that was detected below the playfields was maybe in the grass blades themselves. It wasn't from the tire material, which is so ridiculous. But so I see the real effect, and that bill got killed. I see the real effect of lobbying, money, and politics on policy, and I'm very concerned about that. I see how Pruitt now is, a coal, and was going to appoint the coal industry lobbyist to the EPA, and he's got some very concerning industry ties himself. And now we're going to be infilling with these 700 positions that have been vacated by people in the EPA are probably going to be filled in with lobbyists that have ties to industry that'll affect all the policies we create. There have been some structural changes that Trump is making within the EPA that will seriously affect how we approve chemicals for use in the environment. Here in the United States, we basically treat chemicals innocent until they're proven guilty. So they're let into the market without really being tested. In Europe, you have to prove that a chemical is safe before you can introduce it to the environment. And he's making it even worse now by pulling this small group of people who are responsible for conducting these tests into underneath the EPA, so they won't be independent any longer, and they'll be subject to industry lobby pressure. So this is really important. It's really important to keep money out of politics. I mean, politicians take money from insurance companies. Politicians take money from various things. Like, for instance, there's a big issue here in New Hampshire. It's called Northern Pass, where they're trying to bring utility lines down through New Hampshire. And basically, I won't satisfy I won't change my policy for short-term temporary jobs for long-term environmental damage. So some people won't endorse me because I'm against Northern Pass, and I refuse to change my mind on that. So, we see that on the state level, we see that on the federal level. I think, we should be fighting for the people, not for the companies that pay our paychecks. So that's really my big concern. And we see it happening in New Hampshire. There's a lot of money flowing into some campaigns, and, I'm just not gonna do that. I have tons of volunteers working in my campaign, people that are really dedicated, people that are working really hard, and they're putting sweat equity into my campaign. And I think everybody, I have a ton of volunteers. So I think that tells you something, that the people really want us to fight for them, not for the companies that, put big checks down in Washington.
I totally agree. Donna kind of nailed it. I say things like this as well. She said, we need a culture that is based on humanity, not greed. And I think we're just lacking so much humanity. That's kind of, it seems like what's happening. It didn't happen to me. that's your problem. And,
right.
you know, we just have to get away from that. So seeing people like yourself who are passionate and who do think about others, what a concept, those are the people we need in office. As far as our viewers, what is something you want to leave them with to basically to leave them with something that would convince them to donate or to recommend you to people in New Hampshire? What's a thought you want to leave them with?
Well, my campaign is people powered, and I'm a good example of what one person can do. One person can make a change. And so when you're feeling down, you're feeling disenfranchised, don't forget that. You have a lot of power with your voice. You can use it for becoming elected to office. You can use it for helping people pass legislation. You can use it for a lot of things. You can use it for getting elected to town offices. It's really important to have people at the town levels, the municipal levels, fight for the people as well, for the school boards, for the select boards. Every level of government, it's important for women and important for people that are going to fight for the people to get involved. Because I'll tell you, the town select boards actually have a lot of power. You know, I'm up against our own select boards in some of the fights about our water in the town. And, you know, it's really important to have people activate and feel empowered to do what they can do. And I would say, if you see a woman leader around you that you think is a future leader, tap her on the shoulder, because we know it takes 20 times tapping women on the shoulders to get them to run. I was tapped on the shoulder, and I think, you know, we really need to empower other women. I think we need to empower fighters to get in to the fight and really make a change. We can't let this happen. We can't let people like Roy Moore be elected to office. We need to replace him and people like him with people that are going to fight for the people and are generous. We are generous people. I think I feel our nation is generous, and we need to really to support other people in office. So if you can volunteer your time, if you can volunteer, social sharing helps. You know, we do a lot of stuff now on Facebook and Twitter and Instagram. You know, getting the messages out is really important. And of course, if you can spare some money, that is helpful too. Unfortunately, I have to ask you for that, but.
Yeah, I know. I understand. That's the hard part, but yeah, I usually don't even ask to, you know, people put Patreon links in my show comments. I get very like, yeah. But thank you so much for joining us. This was awesome. You taught me so much, and apparently a few other people, about science and the environment. And to our viewers, thank you so much for joining. As always, Monday, I have a candidate in California. Her name is Maria Estrada, and she actually just filed a lawsuit against Anthony Rendon. So this should be interesting. Yeah. He's trying to stifle her campaign, and she has provided proof, and she's taken on the Democratic Party of California. So it should be an interesting show on Monday. Yeah. Strong women.
Absolutely.
Well, thank you again. Do you want to give your Twitter, your website, all that fun stuff?
That would be great. So my website is Mindy, MINDI, FOR, for Congress, spelled out for. And my Twitter and Facebook is at Mindy, MINDI, the number 4, Congress. Both Twitter and Facebook and Instagram.
Awesome. Well, thank you again so much for joining us, and best of luck with your campaign.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate it. It was fun being on.
Thank you. Take care.
Thanks a lot. You too.